Did you know that the most terrifying scene in the Parallax View was never meant to be scary at all? It was supposed to feel completely normal, and that made it even more disturbing. This film from 1974 changed the way people thought about trust, power, and danger hiding in plain sight. It asked a question that still gives people chills today. What if the biggest threat was not a monster in the dark, but a perfectly normal-looking person standing right next to you? Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about the Parallax View. Number 20. A director who almost said no. Alan Pakula was not the first choice to direct the Parallax View. That might sound surprising now, because the film feels like it was made for him. Every frame drips with paranoia and shadow. But the truth is, Pakula almost passed on the project entirely. He had just finished directing Clute, a dark thriller about a woman being stalked in New York City. That film had drained him emotionally. He had poured everything into it. He was tired in a deep way, the kind of tired that lives in your bones and makes you want to disappear into the countryside for a year. When the script for the Parallax View landed on his desk, his first reaction was hesitation. He read it carefully, set it down, and thought about it for a long time. He was worried about doing another dark story. He was worried about going back into that heavy, suffocating world of fear and shadows. But something kept pulling him back to the pages. He picked up the script again and read it a second time, and then a third time. Each time, the story revealed something new to him, a layer he had missed before, a detail that made his stomach tighten. He began to see that this was not just another thriller. It was something rarer. It was a story about how ordinary life can hide extraordinary evil. It was about how systems, large, invisible systems, can crush individual people without anyone ever raising a hand. Pakula had lived through the early years of the Cold War. He had grown up feeling the low hum of national anxiety that followed American politics like a shadow. He understood what this story was really about, and once he understood, he could not walk away. He signed on to direct, and the film became one of the defining works of his career. What felt like a burden almost became a turning point. What looked like exhaustion almost stopped a masterpiece from being made. Number 19. Warren Beatty's unexpected passion. Warren Beatty was already a major Hollywood star when he chose to make the Parallax View. He had been in Bonnie and Clyde, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, films that people still talk about today. He could have picked almost anything. Studios were lining up to give him roles. So why did he choose this strange, uncomfortable political thriller? The answer is personal. Beatty was deeply affected by the political assassinations of the 1960s. He had watched the murders of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert Kennedy, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with a growing sense of horror. He was not just sad, he was angry. He believed these events were connected. He believed that power in America worked in ways the public was never allowed to see. The Parallax View gave him a way to express that belief through storytelling. He saw the role of Joe Frady, a reporter who stumbles into a conspiracy he cannot fully understand, as a character who stood in for every ordinary person trying to find the truth in a world built on lies. Beatty threw himself into the preparation. He researched political conspiracies. He read newspaper archives. He talked to journalists who had covered the Kennedy assassination. He wanted to understand what it really felt like to pull at a thread and find the whole world unraveling. On set, he was intense and focused. He pushed himself into uncomfortable emotional spaces. He wanted the audience to feel, through him, the specific kind of fear that comes when you realize the danger is not much more organized. His passion for the material lifted the entire production. That was not just acting. That was belief wearing a costume. Number 18. The Parallax Corporation was inspired by real events. The fictional Parallax Corporation, the shadowy organization at the heart of the film, was not pulled entirely from the imagination. The screenwriters, Lorenzo Semple Jr. and David Giler, were working from a novel written by Laverne Singer, but they also drew inspiration from real historical events and real public fears. By the early 1970s, Americans had lived through a decade of political violence that had never been fully explained. The Warren Commission report on President Kennedy's assassination had been released years earlier, but millions of people did not believe it. They felt that the truth was being hidden. The idea of a corporation that recruits and trains political assassins, managing them like a business, like a product line, tapped directly into those unresolved fears. The filmmakers wanted the Parallax Corporation to feel real, not cartoonishly evil, not dramatic, not theatrical. Real, corporate, efficient. That is what made it so frightening. Evil wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase is far scarier than a monster wearing a mask. The writers studied how real organizations operated, their structures, their language, their sense of professional detachment. They then applied all of that to a fictional entity designed to do the most horrible things possible in the most ordinary-seeming way. When audiences watched the film, many of them felt a cold recognition. They had never seen this organization before, but somehow it felt familiar. It felt like something that could exist. It felt like something that maybe already did. What was imagined as fiction landed with the weight of a rumor that everyone suspects might be true. Number 17. The brainwashing scene that nobody forgot there is a scene in the Parallax View that people cannot forget once they have seen it. It is the Parallax Corporation's psychological test, a rapid montage of images shown to Joe Frady as part of an assessment process. The images flash across the screen at high speed. You see families, children, holidays, patriotism, violence, and disturbing content all mixed together. The sequence is designed within the story to identify and program potential killers. But for the audience watching in the cinema, it became something else entirely. It became a piece of experimental filmmaking that left people feeling genuinely unsettled long after the credits rolled. Director Alan Pakula worked with editor John W. Wheeler to design this sequence with extreme care. They tested different rhythms. They tried different combinations of images. They studied the psychology of visual stimulation and how the human brain responds to rapid cuts. The goal was not just to show something strange, it was to make the audience feel what Joe Frady was feeling. Confused, overstimulated, manipulated, unable to separate the wholesome from the disturbing because they were being shown side by side again and again, until the line between them disappeared. Many audience members described feeling physically affected by the sequence. A tightness in the chest, a buzzing behind the eyes, a low-grade nausea. That was exactly what Pakula intended. He did not want you to watch the scene. He wanted the scene to happen to you. What seemed like a movie moment was really a psychological experience, not special effects, just pure, deliberate editing. Number 16. Shooting on location in real political spaces. One of the most striking decisions the filmmakers made was to shoot many of the film's key scenes in real, recognizable political locations. They filmed in real government buildings, real public spaces, and real American settings that carried enormous symbolic weight. This was not just a practical decision, it was a deeply intentional, artistic choice. Pakula wanted the film to feel grounded in the actual physical world of American power. He wanted audiences to look at these spaces they might recognize from the news, from photographs, from their own lives, and feel the wrongness that the story was describing. When conspiracy and corruption are shown happening in familiar, respected places, the effect is far more disturbing than if they happened in some dark warehouse or underground lair. The production team worked with local authorities in several cities to gain access to locations that had never been used for filmmaking before. Some of those negotiations were complicated. Some locations refused, but many agreed, perhaps not fully understanding how the film would use their spaces, not as symbols of safety and democracy, but as backdrops for a story about how democracy can be quietly destroyed from within. When audiences saw those real halls of power used as the setting for political murder and organized deception, the reaction was visceral. The places they trusted felt contaminated. That was the point. What looked like respectability was hiding something much darker beneath the surface. Number 15. Gordon Willis and his love of darkness. The cinematographer on the Parallax View was Gordon Willis, a man who would later be called the Prince of Darkness by people in the film industry. That nickname was not an insult. It was a tribute to his extraordinary skill with shadow and low light. Willis believed that darkness was not simply the absence of light, it was an active presence. It had weight, it had texture. It could tell a story on its own, without a single word of dialogue. On the Parallax View, Willis made lighting choices that were considered almost impossibly bold by the standards of the time. He underlit scenes. He allowed faces to fall partially into shadow. He placed light sources in unusual positions that created a sense of visual unease without the audience ever being able to name exactly why they felt uncomfortable. He was one of the first cinematographers to deliberately make his own actors hard to see, not because of a technical mistake, but as a deliberate artistic statement. If you could not quite see someone's eyes, you could not be sure what they were feeling. If you could not quite see the edges of a room, you could not be sure what was hiding there. Willis turned uncertainty into a visual language. His work on the parallax view was a direct extension of his belief that the most frightening thing in cinema is not what you see, it is what you almost see. Studios were nervous. They worried audiences would complain about the dark images, but audiences leaned forward instead. They felt the film pulling them in. What looked like a technical risk was actually a profound artistic statement. Number 14. The dam scene that genuinely terrified everyone. One of the film's most memorable and physically demanding sequences takes place at a massive dam. Joe Frady chases a suspect across the top of the dam, a breathtaking, terrifying location that towers over everything below. The scene is shot in a way that makes you feel the height with every single cut. Your stomach drops. Your hands grip the arm of your chair. You feel the wind and the vertigo even though you are sitting safely in a cinema seat. What most people do not know is how genuinely frightening the filming of that sequence was for the cast and crew. The location chosen was the Bonneville Dam in the Pacific Northwest, a real, fully operational dam of extraordinary size. The filmmakers did not build a replica. They went to the real thing. Getting permission to film there was a significant achievement on its own. But once they were on location, the realities of the environment created challenges nobody had fully anticipated. The surface of the dam was slippery. The wind at that height was unpredictable and powerful. The noise of the water far below was constant and overwhelming, a roar that filled the air and made normal communication nearly impossible. Camera operators had to work in conditions that required extraordinary physical steadiness. Actors had to perform while managing their own fear. Warren Beatty is not afraid of heights, but he has spoken about the specific, deep sense of danger he felt on that surface. A danger that was not performance, but genuine physical awareness. The scene looks clean and controlled on screen. Behind the camera, it was anything but. What looked like movie making was actually survival with a camera pointed at it. Number 13. A script that was rewritten multiple times. The screenplay for the Parallax View went through many different versions before the one that ended up on screen. Lorenzo Semple Jr. and David Giler were both involved in the writing process, but the road from Lawrence Singer's original novel to the final shooting script was long and complicated. Singer's book had a different structure from the film. Some characters were changed significantly. Some plot threads were removed entirely. Some new scenes were created from scratch that do not exist in the novel at all. Each rewrite was driven by a different concern, sometimes practical, sometimes artistic, sometimes political. There were debates about how much to explain, how much to leave mysterious, how much the audience needed to understand about the Parallax Corporation in order for the story to work. Too much explanation and the conspiracy felt small and comprehensible, which defeated the entire purpose. Too little and audiences would feel lost and frustrated. Finding the right balance took multiple drafts and long, difficult conversations. Pakula was deeply involved in the script development even as he was simultaneously preparing to direct. He had strong opinions about what the story needed. He wanted the ending, in particular, to feel genuinely devastating rather than dramatically satisfying. He pushed the writers toward ambiguity. He pushed them away from resolution. The result was a script that some people found frustrating and others found brilliant. Either way, it was exactly what Pakula wanted, a story that refused to give you the comfort of a clean answer. What seemed like an unfinished story was actually a perfectly constructed wound. Number 12. The film's relationship with the Watergate scandal. The Parallax View was released in 1974, the same year that the Watergate scandal brought down the presidency of Richard Nixon. This was not a coincidence in the sense of careful planning, but the timing created an extraordinary cultural moment. The film arrived in cinemas while Americans were watching real-time political corruption unfold on their television screens every single day. Real senators were holding hearings. Real evidence of criminal behavior at the highest levels of government was being revealed. Real institutions were being exposed as having lied to the public for years. Into that atmosphere walked the Parallax View, a fictional story about a secret organization that murders political figures and covers its tracks perfectly. The resonance was immediate and overwhelming. Audiences did not just watch the film, they felt it as a reflection of what was happening outside the cinema doors. Critics noted the timing. Some called the film prophetic, even though it had been written and filmed before Watergate fully exploded into public consciousness. What Pakula and his collaborators had imagined, the corruption of institutions, the organization of political violence, the impossibility of finding justice through official channels, was being confirmed by real events in real time. The film became more than entertainment. It became a mirror held up to a nation in crisis. Audiences walked out of cinemas not into the normal world, but into a world that the film had just described to them. What looked like fiction had quietly become the news. Number 11. Warren Beatty's method of preparation. Warren Beatty is known in Hollywood for his meticulous approach to his work. He does not simply read a script and show up on set. He researches, he questions, he investigates. And for the Parallax View, his preparation went further than almost anything he had done before. In the role of Joe Frady, Beatty was playing a journalist, a man whose whole identity is built around asking questions and not accepting the first answer he receives. To understand that character fully, Beatty spent time with real investigative journalists. He read their work. He sat with them in newsrooms and diners and listened to them talk about their methods, their instincts, their fears. He wanted to understand not just what journalists do, but how they feel, the specific combination of curiosity and dread that drives someone to keep pulling at a dangerous thread. He also spent time thinking about the character's peculiar position in the story. Joe Frady is a man who discovers the truth and is then destroyed by it. He is not a hero who wins. He is someone whose intelligence and courage lead him directly into a trap from which there is no escape. Beatty found that deeply uncomfortable to inhabit and deeply important. He wanted audiences to feel the tragedy of someone who does everything right and is still obliterated by the size of the forces against him. He made choices in his performance that deliberately avoided traditional heroism. He let Frady seem uncertain. He let him seem small against the vast machinery around him. That was not weakness. That was the truth of the story. What looked like an ordinary performance was quietly one of the bravest things Beatty ever put on screen. Number 10. The ending that shocked Hollywood. The ending of The Parallax View is one of the most discussed and debated conclusions in the history of American cinema. Without revealing every detail for anyone who has not yet seen the film, the ending refuses to give the audience any sense of justice, victory, or resolution. The conspiracy wins. Completely, totally, without consequence. The forces of darkness absorb the truth, explain it away, and move forward as if nothing happened. For audiences in 1974, this was shocking in a way that is hard to fully appreciate today. Hollywood films almost always ended with some form of triumph. The hero survived. The villain was caught. Justice was served, imperfectly perhaps, but served. The Parallax View did none of that. It looked you directly in the eye and said, sometimes the bad guys win. Sometimes they win completely, and the machinery designed to stop them is either helpless or already part of the problem. Studio executives were deeply uncomfortable with this ending. There were arguments about changing it. There were suggestions for alternative conclusions that would give audiences something, anything, to hold on to. Bakula refused. He believed that a comforting ending would betray the entire purpose of the film. If the story was about the impossibility of fighting a system that is perfectly designed to protect itself, then showing that system being defeated would be a lie. He held firm. The ending stayed, and history proved him right. The devastating, uncompromising conclusion is precisely why the film has lasted while more comfortable thrillers from the same era have been forgotten. What felt like a mistake was actually the whole point. Number 9. The film's influence on later conspiracy thrillers. The Parallax View did not just exist in its own time, it sent ripples forward through decades of filmmaking. The films that came after it, dealing with conspiracies, assassinations, and the machinery of political power, all carry some of its DNA. You can trace a direct line from The Parallax View to films like All the President's Men, 3 Days of the Condor, JFK, Enemy of the State, and many others. Filmmakers who came of age watching these 1970s political thrillers absorbed their lessons deeply. The lesson of The Parallax View was specific and powerful. Do not make the conspiracy too small. Do not make it personal. Make it structural. Make it systemic. Show that the danger is not one bad person making one bad choice. It is an organization, a process, a culture that has made violence and deception into a bureaucratic procedure. That lesson changed how political thrillers were written and directed for years afterward. Directors and writers who wanted to explore dark political territory now had a model for how to do it without losing the audience, how to make something enormous feel personal, how to make something abstract feel immediate. The Parallax View showed that a film could be genuinely frightening without a single supernatural element, without a traditional villain, without any kind of monster. The monster was invisible. The monster was a system. And that, it turned out, was the scariest monster of all. What looked like just one more political thriller turned out to be a template for an entire genre. Number 8. The sound design as a weapon. Most audiences watch films, but the people who made the Parallax View understood something important: you also hear films. And the way the Parallax View uses sound and silence is as carefully designed as any element of the visual storytelling. Michael Small composed the film's score, and his approach was unusual. Rather than providing the kind of warm, swelling music that traditionally guides an audience's emotions, Small's score is sparse, dissonant, and often absent entirely. There are long stretches of the Parallax View where there is no music at all, just ambient sound, the hum of a crowd, the echo of footsteps in a large space, the distant noise of machinery, wind. These silences are not empty. They are carefully constructed and deeply deliberate. In the absence of music, the audience is forced to supply its own emotional response, and what the human brain naturally supplies when it is placed in an ambiguous, uncomfortable situation is anxiety. The silence becomes a kind of pressure. You find yourself waiting for something to happen, and the waiting is almost unbearable. Small's score, when it does appear, plays against expectation. It does not rise when tension rises. It does not resolve when a scene ends. It leaves threads hanging. It creates a feeling of musical unease that mirrors the story's refusal to provide comfort or resolution. Together, the sound design and the score create an atmosphere that works on the audience almost subliminally, shaping how you feel without you ever being fully aware of why you feel that way. What sounded simple was actually incredibly complex. Number 7. The use of wide shots to create loneliness. Gordon Willis and Alan Pakula made a specific visual decision throughout the Parallax View that sets it apart from almost every other thriller of its era. They frequently chose wide shots over close-ups. In most thrillers, especially at moments of high tension, the camera moves close. It finds faces, eyes, hands, the small, intimate details of human fear. Closeness creates connection. It makes the audience feel they are with the character, inside their experience. Pakula and Willis did the opposite. At the film's most critical moments, they pulled the camera back, way back. They placed their characters in enormous, largely empty spaces, vast corridors, huge public arenas, monumental architecture, and let those characters appear very small within the frame. The effect is extraordinary and quietly devastating. Instead of feeling connected to Joe Frady, you feel his isolation. You see him as a tiny figure in a world that is much larger and more organized than he is. The spaces themselves seem to be against him. The buildings, the stadiums, the halls of power all seem designed to swallow individuals whole and leave no trace. This visual strategy was not accidental or comfortable. Willis and Pakula knew they were making choices that ran against normal filmmaking instinct. They were pulling audiences away rather than drawing them in. But the result was something rare, a film that made you feel, through its very composition, the specific helplessness of a single human being facing a machine. What seemed like distance was actually the closest the film ever came to the truth. Number 6. Political assassinations that inspired the story. To fully understand why the Parallax View felt so urgent and necessary to the people who made it, you have to understand the specific atmosphere of fear and grief that surrounded American public life in the years leading up to 1974. Between 1963 and 1972, a series of political assassinations and assassination attempts had torn through American society like a series of wounds that never fully healed. President John F. Kennedy was murdered in 1963. Senator Robert F. Kennedy was murdered in 1968 while running for president. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered in 1968. Governor George Wallace survived a shooting in 1972 that left him permanently paralyzed. Each event was explained. Official investigations were conducted. Lone gunmen were identified. And yet millions of Americans did not believe the official explanations. They looked at the pattern, the repeated targeting of powerful, progressive figures, the convenient deaths of witnesses, the official stories that seemed too neat and too simple, and they felt in their bones that something else was happening. Lauren Singer's novel, And Then the Film, gave shape to that feeling. It said, what if you are right to be suspicious? What if there is a system, a corporation, a machine that is doing this deliberately? And what happens to the person who finds the proof? The film did not answer that question with hope. It answered it with the cold reality of what power does to truth when truth becomes inconvenient. What felt like paranoia was actually paying attention. Number 5. Paula Prentice and the courage to play vulnerability among the supporting performances in the Parallax View. The work of Paula Prentice stands out for its particular emotional courage. Prentice plays Lee Carter, a woman who witnesses something terrible and whose fear drives the film's opening movement. Her performance is not a traditional thriller role. It is something more difficult and more specific. She had to play genuine, unperforming fear, not the dramatic, expressive kind of fear that reads well on camera and earns applause, but the quieter, more disturbing kind, the kind that makes a person seem uncertain and fragile and potentially unreliable, the kind that can make an audience doubt whether to trust them. Prentice understood that her job was not to be sympathetic in a conventional way. Her job was to communicate, through very subtle choices, the psychological state of someone who has seen something they cannot process and cannot make anyone else believe. She did research into trauma responses. She talked with Pakula at length about how to communicate genuine terror without crossing into melodrama. The result is a performance that operates almost below the normal register of film acting, quiet, internal, slightly off balance, in a way that is deeply uncomfortable to watch. When her character faces the consequences of what she has witnessed, the moment hits hard precisely because Prentice has spent so much time building the reality of this woman's fear from the inside out. She did not perform fear, she inhabited it. That was not acting, that was excavation. Number 4. The political climate made distribution complicated. Releasing a film about political assassination conspiracies in 1974 was not a simple commercial decision. The United States was in the middle of a political crisis unlike anything the country had experienced in living memory. Watergate was not just a scandal, it was a systemic revelation that reached into every corner of the country's faith in its institutions. In that environment, a film that portrayed political murder as an organized corporate enterprise raised real questions for distributors and studio executives. How would audiences receive it? Would it be seen as exploitative? Would it make people more anxious than they could handle? Would there be political blowback? Some of these concerns were genuine and thoughtful. Others were simply the normal nervousness of people in the entertainment business who did not want to attach their commercial interests to something that might prove toxic. Paramount Pictures ultimately moved forward with the release, and the film performed well at the box office and received strong critical recognition. But the journey to that release was not smooth. There were conversations about marketing. How do you sell a film that offers no comfort and no resolution? How do you write a poster tagline for a movie that ends in total defeat? The marketing team struggled. The film was positioned as a thriller, which it is, but that framing somewhat undersold what it actually was. A work of political art that used the thriller genre as a vehicle for a much darker statement. What looked like a commercial product was actually a challenge to the audience's deepest assumptions about safety and justice. Number 3. The legacy of Alan Pakula's Paranoia trilogy. Film historians and critics who study the 1970s often group the Parallax View together with two other Alan Pakula films, Clute from 1971 and All the President's Men from 1976, and call them the Paranoia trilogy. This grouping was not something Pakula himself planned from the beginning. It emerged organically from the themes that haunted his work during that decade. Themes of surveillance, conspiracy, institutional corruption, and the individual's powerlessness against organized systems of control. Each film approaches these themes differently. Clute is intimate and personal, one woman's experience of being watched and controlled. The Parallax View is political and systemic, the machinery of conspiracy operating at a national scale. All the President's Men is documentary-like, the real story of how journalism pulled back the curtain on presidential corruption. Together, the three films create a complete portrait of an era. They capture the specific texture of 1970s American anxiety, not the colorful, energetic anxiety of the 60s, but something colder and more settled. A recognition that the institutions built to protect people had, in many cases, been quietly compromised. Pakula made these three films not because he set out to build a trilogy, but because he was a deeply attentive artist living through a specific historical moment and responding to it with honesty and craft. The Parallax View sits at the center of that trilogy, the darkest, most abstract, most philosophically unsettling of the three. What looked like three separate films was actually one long and very honest meditation on power. Number 2. The film was ahead of its time in ways even critics missed. When the Parallax View was first released, many reviews praised it warmly but with some reservations. Critics noted its ambition, its visual style, its political seriousness, but some felt that its refusal to provide conventional thriller satisfactions made it cold or distant. They found the ending too bleak. They found the protagonist too passive. They found the conspiracy too vague. Looking back from a distance of 50 years, those criticisms now read very differently. What critics in 1974 called vagueness, later generations recognized as precision, the conspiracy in the Parallax View is deliberately not explained in full detail because that is exactly how real conspiracies function. They are opaque from the inside. They are designed to be unprovable. The protagonist's passivity, his inability to fight back effectively, his slow realization that he is already caught in a trap is not a flaw in the screenplay. It is the entire point. Pakula was not making a story about a hero who defeats the enemy. He was making a story about a person who discovers, too late, the true nature of his situation. Every complaint the original critics made turns out, in retrospect, to be a description of the film's most radical and important qualities. The vagueness is the message. The defeat is the message. The refusal to reassure is the message. What seemed like imperfection was actually precision operating at a level that some viewers were not yet ready to receive. Time has been very kind to the Parallax View. Time has revealed it as something extraordinary. Number 1. The film changed how America told stories about itself. The most important fact about the Parallax View is not about any single scene or any single decision made on set. It is about what the film represents as a cultural object, what it did to the way Americans understood and narrated their own national story. Before the Parallax View and the cluster of political films that surrounded it in the early 1970s, Hollywood movies had a deeply ingrained habit of ultimately affirming the systems they portrayed. Even films that showed corruption or injustice almost always resolved in a way that restored faith in the basic integrity of American institutions. The bad apple was identified and removed. The system, however imperfect, worked in the end. The Parallax View refused that comfort with a totality that had rarely been seen before in mainstream American cinema. It did not just show that bad things happen within good systems. It suggested that the system itself, the invisible, efficient, professional machinery of organized power, was the problem. And more than that, it suggested that individual truth seekers, no matter how brave or determined, cannot win against that machine alone. This was not nihilism. It was not despair dressed up as art. It was a specific, honest, difficult kind of patriotism, the kind that loves a country enough to look clearly at what it is doing wrong and refuse to look away. The film permanently changed the vocabulary of American political cinema. It gave future filmmakers a tool, a way of telling a certain kind of story about power that was both emotionally true and cinematically powerful. Its shadow falls across 50 years of films, and it has not faded. What changed the screen also changed the story America told about itself. Bonus fact, the hidden visual code that most people never see. There is a secret layer to the Parallax View that most audiences never consciously notice, but that affects them deeply every single time they watch the film. It is a visual system that Alan Pakula and Gordon Willis built into the film's composition from the very beginning, and it was so subtle that even many critics who wrote extensively about the film never identified it in precise terms. The system works like this. Throughout the film, the frame is almost never centered in the conventional way. Characters are rarely placed in the middle of the image where the human eye naturally rests and feels most comfortable. Instead, they are constantly pushed to the edges, to the far left, the far right, into corners, behind other visual elements. They appear at the periphery of the frame, on the margins, partially cut off. This is not accidental framing. It is a deliberate, sustained visual statement about the position of the individual within the world the film is describing. The people in the Parallax View, ordinary people, truth-seeking people, people trying to understand what is happening around them, are never at the center of their own story. Power occupies the center. Architecture occupies the center. Empty space occupies the center. The people are pushed aside, marginalized by the very composition of the images that contain them. Pakula and Willis developed this approach over many conversations about what the film was really trying to say, not just in words and story, but in the physical experience of watching it. They wanted the audience to feel without knowing why they felt it, that something was wrong, that the proportions of the world on screen were off in a way that mirrored the proportions of power in the real world. They trusted the subconscious of their audience to receive this message even if the conscious mind never decoded it. It worked. People left the film feeling unsettled in ways they could not fully explain, feeling that the world shown to them was slightly wrong in its geometry, slightly crooked in its architecture, slightly dishonest in its framing, which was, of course, precisely the point. Old tools, composition, framing. The placement of a human figure within a rectangle of light had been used to say something new and deeply uncomfortable about the world. Old tools, new truth. The Parallax View is not an easy film to sit with. It does not wrap its arms around you and promise that everything will be all right. It does the opposite. It looks you in the eye and asks you to consider the possibility that the world is larger and more organized and more indifferent to individual courage than we like to believe. And it asks that question with tremendous craft and genuine love for the audience's intelligence. What makes this film endure after 50 years is not its conspiracy. It is its humanity. The tiny figure of one person standing against a vast, invisible machine. The stubborn belief that truth matters even when no one can hear it. The courage to tell a story that refuses to lie just to make you feel better. Every film hides something worth knowing. Every frame is a choice. Every silence is a statement. Every shadow is a word. The Parallax View is full of those hidden words, waiting for each new generation of viewers to discover them. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time.